Hello friends, it's time for another trigger review. Tonight we're going to take a look at the Geissele SDE, or Super Dynamic Enhanced Trigger. This trigger is the ssa-e, only with a flat bow. I reviewed the ssa-e last year, so I won't bore you with all the specs again. Instead, we're going to focus on how the flat bow changes the feel of the trigger. I was asked about this trigger by a lot of people. I'm sorry it took me a while to get to it. With triggers, sometimes I don't know how I really feel about them until I've spent a lot of time using them. And again, I'm sorry for the delay, but I just needed the time. But first, a quick recap. The ssa-e is my favorite trigger ever. It's a very light two-stage trigger from one of the greatest trigger manufacturers of our time. I love the feel and the pull weight, the way it breaks and how it resets. Is it worth buying the flat bow over the curved one? I don't know. It just depends on what you need your trigger to do. They're both the same price. But first, a shameless plug. As you can imagine, YouTube denied me monetization. Between the guns, the knives, the cursing, and the unorthodox political opinions, you can probably see why. So, I'm entirely viewer supported. On Patreon, if you like my videos, please consider supporting me. It'll help me make better videos more often. Thank you so much for watching, and now back to the show. So how does the SDE feel? I've had this trigger for a while. I needed about 6 months to know if I really like it after spending so long with the ssa-e. In theory, flat trigger bows reduce the felt weight of the trigger by a hair. With a trigger this light, even a small reduction in weight is going to be substantial. Oh, and before I forget, the SDE has a pull weight of about 3.5 pounds, just like the ssa-e. Geissele now gives a range of weights, even for their non-adjustable triggers, as a few variables from manufacturing tolerances to how much lube you use can affect the final weight, if only a little. The difference in feel between the SDE and the ssa-e is a bit, it's more marked than I was expecting. Really, I didn't think I'd notice any difference worth even discussing with you. But before we dive into the differences, let's take a look at how the SDE feels. All right, so I'm going to be doing it with my left hand so that you can see here, and this is a little awkward, but I'm hoping that my hand is positioned in such a way that you can get a better feel for it than the last video. So there's our take up. Very smooth. I hope you can see how smooth that is. The take up is also very short, and then our break, a very crisp snap with really no over travel. It's about as close to perfect as a trigger pull can get. Let's see that again. Sorry to have to reach over it. All right, so crisp take up. And a very crisp break. Very, very smooth. I love it. One more time. And sometimes I like the feel of it at the bottom of the bow where it kind of works. You get a little bit more leverage, which reduces the felt weight even more. Very nice. Let's see the reset. Once more. And again, the reset one more time. So how is this different from the ssa-e? Well, the first stage of the ssa-e feels a little bit heavier, while the second stage and the break feel a little bit lighter. This has to do with the ssa-e's break being a little bit less crisp and defined. To me, less crisp triggers just feel a little bit lighter in the break only. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the take-up. And again, this is a really minute difference that we're talking about here. This is the tiny shit here. Also, the overall felt weight of the SDE can be reduced by moving your finger down the trigger. If you think back to your high school physics class, you're getting more leverage by pulling on the end of the trigger. By the same token, you have to pull the trigger a shorter distance if you pull it at the top, though it'll feel as though more force is required. How has the SDE performed? Really well. Most importantly, it's been completely reliable. Second, most importantly, it helps me shoot a little less like shit, which is always nice. The ssa, for me, is the most precise AR-15 trigger that I've ever fired. By that, I mean I feel as confident as I can really feel shooting targets at longer ranges with that particular trigger. The SDE, though, gives me all that precision, mostly, but I can shoot it a little bit faster. Part of that is the flat bow, part of it is the crispness. That super crisp break lets me get a little careless and smack the trigger without it throwing my shot somewhere crazy. The flat bow lets me slide my finger down where I can get more leverage and work it a little bit faster. Let's take a look at one more thing to do with the trigger. So I've got my finger sort of staging the trigger, and I'm going to just smack it. That's me just wantonly pulling my finger rearward, and something about this trigger shape, it makes it so that it's not gonna jerk the shot off. Jerk the shot off. It's not gonna jerk the shot off nearly as far as that would with some other triggers. And I really do think it's the crispness of the break. It is unbelievably crisp. I hope that's coming through. For me, this is the fastest two-stage trigger I've ever used. This trigger is not much slower than using a single stage. With this trigger, my groups, though, they are not as good as with the ssa-e, but still better than just about anything else out there. Although, again, you have to understand that this is coming from someone who absolutely can't shoot worth a shit. But anyway, looks like we're about to have a pretty big storm out there, even though it's broad daylight and the sun is shining. That's kind of cool. You don't see that every day. Anyway, so like I was saying, with this trigger, my groups aren't as good as with the ssa-e, but they're still better than with just about anything else. I just really get along with the ssa-e's sloppier break. It helps me sort of slide into the shot, and that really seems to aid me past 300 yards or so. So don't get me wrong, the SDE in the hands of someone more competent works just as well, or maybe even better, but I can only tell you how it feels to me. And for the record, we're, again, talking about a very minute difference. But triggers are about subtlety, and the small things matter. The SDE might be the best of all worlds. It's a precision rifle trigger that will also turn your AR-15 pistol into a bullet hose at 25 yards. This is an AR-15 pistol, by the way. You can probably tell by the brace there. The break is insanely crisp, the take-up is insanely smooth, and the reset is unmistakable. There's one small issue I must mention, and that isn't unique to this trigger. Over the course of a long day at the range, flat bows tend to form a hot spot at the end of my delicate little trigger finger. All flat bows do this because the pressure is isolated to a very small part of your finger. It's absolutely not a big deal at all, and it only becomes an issue after hours and hours of use, and who really cares? It's a tiny finger ache. But if you're shooting at 600 yards, a tiny finger ache can matter. So maybe take the very long shots during your first 200 or 300 rounds of the day. Am I right? And the last thing I have to mention will be a problem to some of you, although it doesn't bother me at all. This is also an issue for some people with the ssa-e and the ssa. These triggers have very long resets that deposit your finger almost back at the beginning of travel. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so I've got the trigger all the way back now. Let's reset it. That's pretty much at the beginning of travel. Let's look at how long the travel is. Yeah, that's pretty much to the beginning of it. Sometimes this shocks folks when they first try one of the two-stage Geissele triggers, but you absolutely want the reset to work this way, and it's entirely intentional on Geissele's part. Here's why. My Walther PPQ has a very short reset, and I noticed when I first got it that I'd accidentally throw a double tap out here and there. I've gotten used to the trigger, and it's not an issue anymore, but when you have a very, very short reset, this can happen. And let's look at how short this is. For a pistol, that's really, really short. So that's awesome. It helps you shoot the gun super fast, but you do run the risk of a shot that you did not intend coming out of the gun. And I've been at the range and I've seen folks with very light single-stage AR-15 triggers let off an accidental burst as their finger rides the reset and it works like a bump stock. That's fine for a target trigger, but the Geissele triggers can be used for more serious stuff. I'm not a fancy operator man, but I do have Geissele triggers in my home defense guns, and this longer reset makes it so that you are far, far less likely to bump off a few extra rounds, something that could be utterly tragic in a home invasion scenario, or any scenario for that matter. In actual practice, the Geissele reset isn't going to slow you down, and it offers you a very necessary additional safety. It's rarely discussed, but the Geissele reset is super loud and the click is very pronounced. Let's listen to that one more time. Yeah, that's really, really nice and loud. I love it. You can feel it, you can even hear it, even when firing very quickly. Like every other part of this trigger, the reset is carefully considered. Final thoughts. So is this now my favorite trigger? After all, it might be the best of all possible triggery worlds, right? It's not my favorite, but it's probably my second favorite. And who the hell knows? Maybe that'll change as time passes. I've used the ssa-e for so long that I still prefer it. That's not to say that it's a superior trigger. I just have more time using it, and so I feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But there's no denying that the SDE feels amazing, and if you prefer a flat trigger bow, it's the way to go. One last thing, if you're looking for a trigger for your first gun, I'd recommend that you not go with one of these. It's just too light. Under extreme duress, our fine motor function is one of the first things to go, and Geissele recommends the slightly heavier ssa for defense for this very reason, although I personally would go heavier than that. 3.5 pounds is extremely light for a rifle trigger. And if you're in your first years of shooting ARs or you don't go to the range very often, maybe stick with that mil-spec trigger for a while until you feel like you've gotten the hang of it. Besides, mil-spec AR triggers aren't nearly as bad as folks say, and I think they kind of have a special lousy magic that makes them feel sort of good. I have one or two installed in guns just because I enjoy them. So spend your time getting to know that trigger first. Not only will it give you some additional safety on top of the reset already, it'll give you some additional safety in a scary defensive situation, but it'll also give you a greater appreciation for something like the Geissele. Anyhow, I hope this video was helpful, and I'm going to branch out and try some of the single-stage Geisseles before too long, and then when I've spent enough time with them, I'll make a video about those too. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Good night.